Christian nationalists, white supremacists, and the far right in general do have a lot of influence in my country, the United States. Not necessarily because they're very numerous, but they do weasel their way into places of great power. And that is very dangerous. I'll show you why. You see, they sort of merged into a coalition, and they often share and repeat two slogans that I want you to consider. Slogan number one, import the third world, become the third world. And slogan number two, socialism or communism has failed everywhere it has been tried. The reason I want to point out those two slogans is because of the enormity of their irony. You see, the Christian nationalist, white supremacist, far-right amalgamation promote the very policies and ideals most commonly found in the third world. And it's those ideas that have failed all throughout history and all around the world. So both of those slogans perfectly apply to themselves. In other words, they fear the very thing that they themselves would turn the United States into, the third world. Before I get into this, let me give you a bit of a disclaimer. I'm going to be talking about the third world in negative terms and referring to it as the third world. But there's a couple of problems with that. First, it's an outdated and inaccurate term derived to describe countries unaffiliated with Cold War superpowers. But now it's mostly used just to mean poor countries. But since it's the term the Christian Nationalist Coalition uses in their arguments, I'm going to use it also just for purposes of clarity. Today, it's more accurately called the developing world. And just know that I'm not referring to all the people of the developing world as if they all agree with those who rule over them or agree with those who influenced the direction of their societies. Just like much of the population of the United States doesn't agree with our current governance, so too does much of the developing world disagree with those who rule over them. Such people have sent me very kind messages from those countries where they have to hide who they are. And that's what happens when your government is taken over by religious authoritarian zealots. They oppress people. Now on to the rest of the video. Why would the Christian Nationalist Coalition be against immigration from the very places that already have the policies they support? Because people from those places are the wrong race. Because not only do they want the policies of the third world, but they also want the homogeneity of it. They're explicit about that. They say things like, why do all the other races get to have their own countries, but not white people?
Well, just on principle, like every other group in the world has the right to its own homeland except white people? Like what?
In other words, they're jealous of other countries that they see as inferior. There's some cognitive dissonance going on there.
What country has ever grown stronger the more divided it's been?
None, but I'm not saying that we have to get more divided.
No, but diversity definitionally will divide you.
He's using equivocation to hide the fact that he supports division. Division of the races. Division means separated, as in segregation. That's not what diversity is. Diversity is variety, but together. So to answer his question without the dishonest equivocation, the United States is the most diverse country, and they say that the United States is the greatest country on earth. Yet they also want to fundamentally alter it so that it's more in line with countries that they dislike the most. In other words, racially homogenous. The reason they don't see that as a problem is because they think it's more about the people than the policy, hence the racism. But my question is, why would they want to adopt the policies and ideals of groups they consider to be inferior? In other words, why would they believe that inferior people implement superior ideas? And if the ideas they implement really are superior, then how are you defining their inferiority? Let me show you a rather straightforward example that represents a very common sentiment among those I'm talking about. This person says, quote, "The Democrats are buddying up with Islam, so let's go ahead and take the top issues liberals care about and see how this partnership is going to go. No abortion rights, no transgender/gay rights, no diversity, equity, and inclusion, no religious freedom, no women's rights, no protecting children, no basic human rights. This partnership is going to take us all down because liberals don't understand this." I'm sure she thought she cooked with that one, but do you see where she made her rather large mistake? In the act of trying to demonize Muslims and scare liberals, by listing all the good things she thinks Muslims don't support, she inadvertently also made a list of good things Republicans don't support either. She says, this partnership is going to take us all down. But she herself has tweets railing against abortion rights, railing against trans people, and railing against diversity, equity, and inclusion. Rather than display a Muslim and liberal alliance in her tweet, what she accidentally did is really showcase how similar Christian extremists are to Islamic extremists. Yes, they're different religions, but they're both Abrahamic, and their extremists share the exact same values. What she doesn't understand is that Democrats stand up for Muslims in the United States because they are often discriminated against as an extreme minority in the United States. That's a totally different dynamic than in countries run by Islamic extremists, who you will not typically find being supported by Democrats. You'll find them shaking hands with Donald Trump. You'll find your president selling our most advanced stealth fighter jets to the actual people who did 9/11 and who also happen to have China as their top trading partner, while clueless conservatives on Twitter fearmonger over a moderate Muslim who supports LGBT rights becoming the mayor of New York. They even go so far as to post memes that say New Yorkers forgot 9/11, as if people like Mamdani did 9/11, rather than the people being invited into the White House right now. So a distinction needs to be made. Just like there are moderate Christians who are good people and who do not want to infringe upon our rights, so too are there moderate Muslims who are good people and who do not want to infringe upon our rights. I've met some of them. I know they exist. Since Christian nationalists have far more power in the United States, standing up for the Muslim minority will be far less likely to result in the loss of the rights on that list than it would be to align with the far more powerful Christian nationalist coalition, who would be far more likely and able to destroy the rights on that list. While she meant to target liberals and Muslims, she just gave us a very compelling list of reasons to resist the rise of Christian nationalism in America, which is functionally no different than what an Islamic extremist government would do. The only reason we're not there yet is because we're still resisting them, so we can't give up. And that includes moderate and liberal Christians who should be very motivated to not allow their religion to become something totally rooted in hatred. If you think it's ridiculous for me to compare Christian nationalists to Islamic extremists, then you really need to start paying attention. You are afforded the luxury of questioning my comparison, simply because the Christian nationalists have not yet accomplished all of their clearly stated goals. Do you really want to give them a chance to do that? Tweets like this aren't coming from people warning you against it. No, this is a pastor, and he's telling you out loud what their goals are. Listen to them. Let's look at some maps to illustrate what I'm talking about. This is gender equality by country. Christian nationalists, white supremacists, and the far right in general constantly try to sell the idea that gender equality is either unnatural, ungodly, or just plain undesirable, and promoted by sinister Jews and or Marxists trying to destroy the family unit so that they can conquer our nation from within. So, their ideal is to be against gender equality and for our nation to be patriarchal. They want to repeal the 19th Amendment and put men in complete control of the government. Well, we see that their ideal is most commonly practiced in the third world. However, in the very places they claim liberals want the U.S. to become. They want us to change, to be more like they are, in all but race. Third world nations are largely against gender equality. The Islamic extremists are against gender equality, and so too are our very own Christian nationalists, all peas in a pod. This map shows the Women, Peace, and Security Index. So you see, everywhere women do not have gender equality, they also have less peace and security. The Christian Nationalist Coalition will try to get you to believe it's the opposite, that if women will just submit to them, that they will provide the women with security. In practice, that's not how it works out. Under Christian nationalist rule, the dark areas of this map would spread. Women would be subjugated once again. The Christian nationalists would not see it as subjugation, however, but merely as putting women in their rightful, natural place as ordained by God, a place which they claim women either outright desire or deep down secretly desire, no matter what they outwardly profess. And disregarding what women profess is very consistent with their other feelings on women having agency over their own lives and bodies. In other words, they don't care what women say or feel. Just like the Islamic extremists, the Christian nationalists want the women's place to be one of subservience, in which the man would have ultimate control over the finances, the household, what women should wear, and even over sexual intercourse, whether it be just for pleasure or reproduction. She wouldn't really have a say. In regard to intercourse, she would essentially be reduced to a masturbatory device and a broodmare to be available whenever her husband demands. Her duty would be to submit, and that duty would be justified by the full authority of the creator of the universe, as dictated by ancient patriarchs who died thousands of years ago and who also wanted total control over women. Once they consider the woman old and used up, she becomes nothing more than a babysitter, a cook, and a housekeeper, often resulting in the husband having extramarital affairs, again justified by his nature and excused by God's divine forgiveness. So once again, in the subjugation of women, the Christian nationalists would perfectly align with Islamic extremists. Being persuaded by such people who basically treat women as property or like a carton of milk with an expiration date will make you very unattractive to most women and will likely cause you to become an incel or divorced. Perhaps that's why Christian nationalists also want to end women's ability to divorce as well.
would they divorce, or do you want them to keep going in the relationship?
Keep going.
You can't divorce. I mean, that's not a real thing. You can like separate. See, his Catholic background shines through. He knows. You can't divorce. You can separate, but you can't actually divorce. That's not a real thing.
Even though it might be like physically abusive?
You got to endure. People are too...
You want to stay...
Gee, I wonder where else in the world women can't get divorced on the same terms as men. Oh, wait, we don't have to wonder, do we? Here they are, as shown on this map. The awful religious extremist countries, once again, show us the template of what the Christian nationalists would do to the United States if given enough power. This map shows where abortion is outlawed or restricted to various degrees around the world. Again, we see that it is yet another policy idea that is most prevalent in the third world. That obviously has a lot to do with the lack of women's rights in those places, and the idea that gender equality is a bad thing. This is another policy in countries they fear and call inferior, yet want to adopt in their home country, which they consider superior. Christian nationalists are very much against homosexuality and the LGBT community in general. One of their goals would be to ban it altogether, to make it illegal as ordained by what they believe to be the creator of the universe. This map shows where in the world it is currently illegal to be gay, punishable by prison or even death. Now, as you can see, this is also a third world phenomenon. Another case of looking to inferior countries for policies to adopt into the superior country so that it can more closely resemble the inferior countries. It doesn't make sense from a logical standpoint until you realize that their real motive is based purely on bigotry against people and not the actual results of bad policies and ideals that make a nation a much worse place to be. Their emotional attachment to their own bigoted ideals overrides the easily observable empirical reality of what actually makes a nation a worse place to live. In other words, these are emotionally driven people, not evidence-based people. Yet they will try to get you to believe that it's the exact opposite. This map shows the countries where people are the most religious, and our recurring theme holds true. The darker the blue, the more people consider religion to be important. Christian nationalists would want the United States to be very dark blue, just like the Third World, Northern Africa, and the Middle East, the places they fear the most. And of course, it's no coincidence that those are the places much more likely to discriminate based on their religious beliefs, just like the Christian nationalists would if they could. For example, here is a map of where atheists are persecuted the most. The darkest of areas are where atheism is punishable by death. And as you can see, one of those countries is Saudi Arabia, which warmly welcomes Trump and who Trump warmly welcomes in return. Like the Third World and like Islamic extremists, Christian nationalists also hate and would want to restrict or even kill atheists, which would result in the United States more closely resembling the Third World or Islamic extremist countries. Once again, that aligns with this map, which shows where there is more or less freedom of expression and humanist values. Again, Christian nationalists would happily restrict both, and again, it would cause the United States to more closely resemble countries they call inferior. Speaking of using the government to impose or enforce your religion, Benjamin Franklin said that if your religion needs to call upon the powers of the government to support it, then it's a sign of it being a bad religion. And just as you'd expect, places with such bad policies and ideals are also the worst in terms of education, as this map shows. Not coincidentally, the Christian nationalists want to eliminate the liberal institutions that hardly exist in the third world, like social welfare programs. They would eliminate the Department of Education and advocate for homeschooling as if all parents are even remotely qualified to do such a thing. But they believe that would stifle the attempts of the liberals and leftists from indoctrinating their children. But it's obviously the opposite, and it's they who wish to indoctrinate children, which is why they try to target them with their religion as early as possible. One of the fatal flaws that could end up being part of their undoing is that they don't believe in certain facts, so they label those facts as leftist, which is why when those facts are taught to their children, they mistakenly see it as leftist indoctrination. Obviously, you're going to have some pretty big problems when you label reality itself a political enemy, because reality is a hell of a thing to try to resist. In the end, reality always wins. So if you call it a political enemy, you're putting yourself at a great disadvantage. Vaccines aren't leftist. Evolution is not leftist. Climate change is not leftist. It's just reality, and you will be affected by reality whether or not you think it's leftist. Let's look at happiness rankings of the world. As you can see, happiness is lowest, where people have the least amount of freedom and where the policies and ideals of the Christian nationalists are actually implemented. And of course, the garbage policies and ideals of the third world are perfectly replicated as a microcosm in the United States itself and all of the individual states that more closely lean toward the policies and ideals of the third world. Let's take a look. Here's happiness rankings by state. Red and orange are the least happy, while blue and green are the most. Any clue as to why the southeastern United States is the least happy? Perhaps we can learn something about it by looking at the rest of the metrics we looked at for the third world. Here's public school rankings by state. It's much worse in the southern United States and much better in the Northeast and the Northwest, which is much more liberal. This is mirrored on the next map, which separates the states based on how religious they are. The more educated you are, the less religious you tend to be. Now, before you chalk that up to Democrat indoctrination, remember that the trend holds true not only in the United States, but also around the world. Part of that is a result of perceiving objective facts as belonging to your political enemy, thus leading to the rejection of objective facts and a disadvantage in terms of education, which then leads to all sorts of other disadvantages. The Christian Nationalist coalition commits self-harm, and they handicap their own children, thinking that they're helping them. This map shows states by rights for women, or legal protections for women. And as you can see, we have a lot of the same culprits that we see for higher religion and lower education. The southeastern United States being the worst, once again. It turns out that the more ignorant you are, and the more religious you are, the more likely you are to oppress women. The worldwide maps clearly showed that, so why wouldn't that be the case in the United States as well, as it is? And this map shows when gay marriage was legalized in each state. The green was early on, the red was later, and the black had to be forced by the Supreme Court. Again and again, we see the states that most closely emulate the third world among the states are consistently in the southeastern United States, aka the Bible Belt. That holds true for violent crime as well. These states have the lowest violent crime rates. As you can see, the 5 least violent states in the United States are all blue states. Now, these states have the highest violent crime rates. And as you can see, of the 5 most violent states, 4 of them are red states. Now, of course, the nationalists like to blame that on blue cities within the red states, but there's a few problems with that. First, the less violent blue states also have blue cities. Second, cities have higher crime regardless of political affiliation because of population density. More interaction equates to more transgression. And blue cities are still subject to red state law and red state governance. So let's look at a map of the United States that shows the homicide rate by county. Looks very consistent with all of our other third world metrics, doesn't it? Yet this is not the map a Christian nationalist would imagine, because they are trained by propaganda to see certain facts as leftist. So they reject those facts to their own disadvantage. According to them, the absence of God is what causes so much violence. Yet if you want to find where it's the most violent in the United States and around the world, you simply have to go to where it's the most religious, the least educated, and the most socially repressed. But those facts sound way too leftist, so they reject those facts. That means this huge problem in the southern United States doesn't get solved because they don't think the problem exists. Trump sends the troops up to Minnesota because he says that's where the big problem is, even though it's among the least violent states. And he ignores this massive festering wound that is the Bible Belt because they voted for him, and the state governments of the South support him. So he wants their style of governance to spread. Results be damned. Because all that truly matters to them is power, not lives, not education, not affordability, not happiness, not freedom, not facts, not even crime, but power. And when the negative results of their policies and ideals manifest, they blame those negative results on all the usual scapegoats, anyone but themselves. And that results in even more hatred toward the scapegoats, and thus the problem gets even worse.
I love the poorly educated. Smart people don't like me, you know?
What about protecting children? Doesn't the Christian Nationalist Coalition care about children? No, not really. They use children to sell the idea of the family as a way to preserve their ideals. In other words, children are seen as a means to an end, a mere tool, rather than vulnerable human beings who should be cared for, nourished, and loved. There's a reason they don't care about Donald Trump's obvious involvement with Epstein. There's a reason they don't care that he cheated on all of his wives. There's a reason they didn't care about children losing their food benefits during the government shutdown. There's a reason they don't care about the tens of thousands of children who were killed in Gaza. There's a reason they explicitly wanted DOGE to cut benefits for children who have died because of it. And it's not because they care about children. It's because children are how they create more soldiers for their causes. So if it's children from families they see as the enemy, well, then those kids can die for all they care. But what about the way the Islamic extremists see children? Don't they allow their old men to have sexual relations with girls way too young for them? Yeah, and that's terrible. Now compare the religions. The Islamic extremist rationale for having sex with young girls is the same as it is for the Christian extremist.
If that's what men are providing, if that's what they're bringing to the table, love through protection and provision, that takes time. If what women are providing is beauty as well as procreation, right? So giving to her husband children that will bear his name. And then also you could also argue submission from the scripture. I think of Ephesians chapter 5, wives, submit to your husbands in everything as the church submits to Christ. Well, when you think of that for a wife, time is actually not on her side. Fertility declines with age. Beauty, right? The Proverbs also say beauty, charm is deceitful and beauty is fleeting. So the beauty is fading. That's what the scripture says. Beauty fades, the physical beauty. The fertility is decreasing. And also, because we live in a secular society, the longer that she is living, the more years she racks up without coming under the headship of a husband, but having already left the headship of her father, she is building up a longer and longer tenure of a headless life.
Right.
She is declining in beauty, declining in fertility, and only really increasing in one thing, which would be insubordination.
Religious zealotry of the Abrahamic religions all lead to the same place. Men using authoritarianism to impose their will and claiming that it's ordained by God. The resulting loss of freedom always results in a much worse society. They're pointing beyond the United States in both time and geography to find examples of how to do it better. But how can that be possible if the United States is already the greatest of all? And how can that be possible when all of their examples resulted in objectively worse conditions? They often try to rationalize away the fact that they want to adopt the policies and ideals of the third world by saying that the main variable that causes different results is race. The problem with that way of thinking, besides the obvious, is that not only have the Christian nationalist coalition's ideals been tried all around the world, but also all throughout history as well. And the results throughout history, regardless of race, are just as disastrous. Yet that doesn't stop them from appealing to the past, because they've been indoctrinated to believe that the past was better. And they think we're in a fallen state. And they describe our society as being infested by degeneracy and immorality. They often appeal to the United States before the 1950s as being sort of an ideal society. But those were dark times, and they were made dark times by people who thought exactly as they do. Look at the suicide rate. Look at the homicide rate. The revisionists who do not appeal to the pre-1950s era as a more peaceful time are usually Gen Xers like myself who naively point to the 80s and 90s as being more peaceful because they have nostalgia and survivorship bias. But the truth is that the 80s and 90s were a significantly more violent period. People weren't happier back then. But if the nationalists have their way, then maybe it will end up being a better period than the near future. We're certainly already on our way back down because of their leadership. Things are getting harder because we're not learning that these people do not have our best interests at heart. The propagandists post these smiling white families posing for a picture, and they say things like, "This is what they took from you," which makes me shake my head because it's usually the ideals of the people who post that shit who took the American dream from you. They lean into the greed and corruption that made housing unaffordable. So now you can't buy a house. They lean into the idea that women have a certain role to play and that they owe you something. So if you listen to them, now you're repulsive to women. I easily found the family life that many of them cannot. I was fortunate enough to buy a house in the early 2000s before prices skyrocketed, and I've been with my wife for 30 years now. I certainly did not accomplish that by listening to them or people like them. I did it by sincerely caring and being unselfish. For that, I've been called a simp by incels. But that's the opposite of a simp. Simps are selfish. I have what they want because I was not seeking it for my own selfish desires the way they would. Women can tell when you have selfish desires. Your desires display red flags. That family man lifestyle simply found me because of the way I am, not because I outwardly tried to achieve it. But you know why they find those memes convincing and why they think something has been taken from them? Because no matter how they look on the outside, they're repulsive on the inside, which is much more difficult to fix. And repulsive people have a disadvantage when it comes to finding a spouse and starting a family, at least a happy family. And that's because their contempt and hatred doesn't stay on the inside. It lashes out. So they think an evil, nebulous they took the family life from them. They don't introspect. They don't consider that maybe it's their own fault. No, it's the rest of society that's the problem. No, it's an entire gender that's the problem. It can't possibly be that your self-inflicted social media feed turned you into an undesirable asshole. It can't possibly be that you support the most corrupt and greedy politicians and corporate interests that have ever been in power since the days of the robber barons. No, that can't be it. It can't be that constantly listening to the worst people imaginable influenced you to be like they are, and now the opposite sex sees you as a grotesque gremlin raising every warning flag imaginable, signaling nothing but danger and misery. There isn't a secret Jewish Marxist conspiracy to destroy the family unit. Your wound is self-inflicted. But since we're talking about how the past in the United States was not some magical utopia, there's a very interesting dynamic to consider. For some countries, it was the exact opposite of what the United States experienced. Let's look at some other pictures from back then. Look at these pictures. Where is this? California? New York? Miami? No, this is what Iran used to look like in the mid-20th century, before religious extremists took it over. Now, Iran used to be much more progressive. While that may have been a good thing, the problem was that it didn't happen organically. Western forces like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel tried to artificially westernize Iran because they wanted to gain influence over its oil. They ousted their democratically elected leader and installed a monarchy. A lot of the religious leaders in Iran didn't like that Iran was being influenced by foreign countries. As the religious factions resisted, the government cracked down and became more authoritarian. US-backed secret police violated people's rights. The religious leaders saw it as a loss of their national identity. They were the Iran First religious nationalists, you might say. It was a very unique rebellion because it happened during a time of great prosperity. And in the end, the religious extremists won. And while the period of Iran's progressivism was caused for reasons that were less than honorable, and certainly wasn't universal across the country, you cannot deny where the loss of that progressivism led them. Now, women are severely punished for not wearing a hijab. When they protested a particularly egregious case of punishment, the religious extremist government cracked down, killing hundreds of people and installing mass surveillance. Now, if a woman is caught dressing inappropriately in Iran, she can go to prison for 10 years. Now, there are barbaric public executions, exactly like the sort that the Christian nationalists in the United States would want.
Yeah, that's how you should. By the way, this is my other problem with death penalty. It takes too long, too many appeals. Expensive. It should be public. It should be quick. It should be televised.
Well, this can't be right, can it? The last execution in France was guillotine in 1977.
100% true. They used the guillotine.
Until 77?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
There's videotape of it.
Honestly, that's like what we should be doing, and I agree. It should be public
and
televised.
Public square. By the way, you could fund the government
to watch it.
You could have like brought to you by Coca-Cola, and no, I'm not kidding. By the way, I would totally tune in to see some pedo get their head chopped off. Convicted by a jury.
By the way,
years.
That's going to get.
No, I'm talking about a real thing. I'm not talking
all
about
executions in Belarus are by firearm. That's not a choice or anything.
Andrew's saying don't make kids watch it, and I think the absolute
I think
opposite.
at a certain age, it's an initiation.
16, if you can drive, you can watch it.
No, but hold on.
Not even 16.
If all of a sudden you look at some of these savages, like in Indiana, there was this guy that went in and killed a pregnant woman and her 3 kids.
Yeah.
And you know what? I want to watch that execution. That'll make my day better. I want to see him on a public block and get him be publicly executed. And I think that would be justice. You think children should have, you should see it? What is the age? At what age should you start to see public executions?
16.
I think you could do it earlier. I think you maybe at age 12,
whenever,
like 6th grade or so.
So I really do kind of not only want to see them killed in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water, but I'd really like to see them suffer. I would like Trump and Hegseth to make it last a long time, so that they lose a limb and bleed out a little. Like, I'm really having a difficult time ginning up sympathy for these guys who 10 seconds earlier almost got taken out by the initial bomb, but because they managed to get ejected, a little too soon, had to be taken out in the water. I realize legally it may make a difference, but truly, Mark, this is a tough case to really gin up the sympathies of the American people.
Yeah. Religious extremists always do that, no matter the religion. They want to have ultimate control over everyone and relish in making spectacles of punishing their enemies. It's gotten to the point in which Christian nationalists are talking like ISIS, wanting people rounded up, wanting people publicly executed, wanting to see people suffer on video. And these aren't fringe nationalists you only see in some obscure comments section. These are mainstream people with actual clout and audiences, influencing the direction of our society into barbarism. And it may surprise some of you to see Christians behaving like ISIS. But Christians were doing public torture and executions centuries before ISIS even existed. This is not new. This is old. To you religious extremists in the United States, I say that this is what an actual fallen state looks like. It looks like ISIS, and it looks like you. This is what actual degeneracy and immorality looks like. This is where religious authoritarianism always leads, regardless of whether you call yourself a Christian or a Muslim. You all essentially desire the same things: control over women, control over the state, and the wholesale elimination of progressivism in every respect. On December 8th, the official Twitter account of the United States Southern Command posted this picture of a soldier in uniform without a single American flag in sight. Instead of an American flag, the soldier brandishes the Jerusalem cross, a symbol of the Crusades, a symbol tattooed onto the chest of our new Secretary of War. These are not the actions of a healthy government or country. You complain about our secular society, where you have the freedom to change the channel or not click on something you don't want to watch, where you can freely choose how you want to dress and what you want to say. And you take advantage of those freedoms to promote a way of life that would bring nothing but misery and oppression. Your ideas have been tried in many other places and many other eras, and they always result in worse conditions for all but the privileged few at the top who control everything. This is what Iraq used to look like in the mid-20th century. This is what Afghanistan used to look like in the mid-20th century. Their timelines sort of look like the inversion of ours, with them being more progressive in the past, but then becoming repressive religious extremists in the present. And that was not without the help of Western hands vying for power. The Soviets tried to take over Afghanistan, so the United States, under Ronald Reagan, funded and armed the opposition, the Mujahideen, which were the religious extremists. And after a decade of war and over 1 million deaths, they drove out the Soviets with our help and took control of the country, becoming the Taliban. This newspaper headline from back then describes Osama bin Laden as a, quote, anti-Soviet warrior putting his army on the road to peace. That's how misguided we were. That's who our allies were back then. Religious extremists. The religious right in America saw an ally in the religious extremists in Afghanistan, with the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But when the United States was attacked on 9/11, our attackers were not from Afghanistan. We just claimed that's where they trained, you see. That's where they used the monkey bars to increase their upper body strength. So naturally, we gave George Bush the green light to send American troops to die over there for the next 20 years. But in actuality, 19 of the 20 terrorists who attacked us on 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia. The guy who planned it, Osama bin Laden, not only came from Saudi Arabia, but also had close ties to the Saudi royal family. And that country, Saudi Arabia, is yet another religious authoritarian country, a country that has lavished gifts onto Donald Trump, and in return, Trump has sent them tons of weapons worth billions of dollars, including the most advanced stealth fighter jets we have. They've used weapons that were built using your tax dollars to kill nearly 500,000 people in Yemen. We do this despite Saudi Arabia being antithetical to our professed American values. When Donald Trump invites the Saudi royal prince into the White House, he bows down and kisses the ring. He scolds a reporter for bravely pointing out that the prince is responsible for butchering and dismembering a columnist for the Washington Post named Jamal Khashoggi. Trump even victim blamed the reporter and implied that he had it coming. Not surprising given what Trump thinks of reporters, mainly because they're one of the few left who even try to hold him to account, even though they don't do it nearly as much as they should.
Mr. President, is it appropriate, Mr. President, for your family to be doing business in Saudi Arabia while you're president? Is that a conflict of interest? And Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office. Why should Americans trust you? And the same to you, Mr. President.
Now, who are you with?
I'm with ABC News, sir.
You're with who?
ABC News, sir.
Fake news. ABC fake news. One of the worst in the business. But I'll answer your question. As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
It's also not surprising because the Saudi Arabian prince is a kindred spirit. He installed loyalists and purged his government and military of anyone he thought might challenge his authority. He rounded them up, brutally tortured them, and then demanded that they wire him all of their money. Basically, the guy is just a glorified mugger and murderer. But Trump loves the guy. One reason probably being that he gets to do things Trump only dreams of. Compare Trump's treatment of the Saudi Arabian prince to his treatment of our allies. The murdering, torturing prince who showered Trump with gifts becomes an honored guest, you see, who cannot be questioned about blatant murder, and who must receive the utmost respect at all times, and who can be given the world's most advanced weaponry. But when the president of Ukraine, our ally, who's currently being invaded by Russia, sets foot in the White House, Trump and Vance berate and belittle him.
You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred.
I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's backed you far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
What about
if you didn't have our military equipment, if you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. What are you saying?
She's asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now?
Why don't you wear a suit? Why don't you wear a suit? You're at the highest level in this country's office and you refuse to wear a suit. Just want to see if do you own a suit?
Yeah, problems.
A lot of Americans have problems with you not respecting
I don't have such.
This is going to be great television, I will say that.
Trump said he would end the conflict with Russia on day one because he's the best negotiator. Yet a year later, he's still not held to account for his failure. His sycophantic following never holds him to account for anything.
They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom.
And through the power of repetition, he got his followers to believe that Russia did not try to influence our election, which is objectively, verifiably false. In fact, they always try to influence our elections every time we have an election, just as we do the same to other countries. But apparently, they suspiciously stopped doing that when Trump ran for office. And it's just a coincidence that Russia was able to cheer and revel in how badly Trump treated Zelensky, treating him in a way that he would not dare treat Putin. Let us not forget that Trump's campaign manager was Paul Manafort, who was a deeply corrupt lobbyist for the politicians of many third world countries. He ended up in Ukraine promoting Russian interests because he was getting paid millions of dollars by Russia to do so. During Trump's campaign manager was meeting with Russian intelligence agents. He was convicted of 8 counts of tax fraud, bank fraud, witness tampering, obstruction, failing to report foreign bank accounts related to the Russian money he was receiving, and he pled guilty to conspiracy against the United States. And on December 23, 2020, Trump issued him a full pardon. Remember that the next time you hear Trump call it a hoax, the same way he's now trying to repeat the success of that tactic by claiming the Epstein files are also a hoax. Every time he gets caught, it's a hoax. Every time he loses, it's a fraud. And nobody can hold him to account. On Wednesday, December 3rd, he said he'd have no problem releasing the footage of the double-tap airstrike in the Caribbean.
You released video of that first boat strike on September 2nd, but not the second video. Will you release video of that strike so that the American people can see for themselves what happened?
I don't know what they have, but whatever they have, we'd certainly release, no problem.
Then, on Monday, just 5 days after he said that on national television, he said this.
Mr. President, you said you would have no problem with releasing the full video of that strike on September 2nd off the coast of Venezuela. Secretary Hegseth now says...
You said that. I didn't say that. This is ABC fake news.
It's fake news to claim that he said what he said. Few Trump supporters are going to see both clips the way I just presented them to you back to back. So they'll hear fake news and then have their Pavlovian response and conclude that Trump is not lying, the media is lying. And the ones who do know better will dismiss it by saying, well, all politicians lie. We're dealing with spineless, shameless, cruel people with no principles. But why am I talking about Trump in this context? Is it because I have Trump derangement syndrome? It's because he is who the religious right gave us. Take note of it. Document it. Look at what happened all throughout history and all around the world when the religious extremists put their people in power. What you're experiencing right now are the effects of that. And it's not surprising. It's 100% predictable. The country is being divided. Authoritarianism is rising. Open corruption is rising even more than before, and that's saying something. Political unrest will increase. The economy will become more unstable. This is how those religious authoritarian declines always begin. And if the religious right continues to gain influence, you will see a history develop that looks similar to what happened to the progressive areas of the Middle East. And then one day, perhaps a future YouTuber in some other country can show you pictures of what America used to look like before it turned into a depressing, religious, authoritarian hellhole. LGBT people and atheists would be back in the closet or either be put through some sort of mandatory conversion process, deported, or even executed. Anything having to do with being transgender, outlawed, period. Abortion, outlawed. Any institutions deemed liberal in nature would be dismantled, especially ones involving education. No more social services. Anyone deemed deserving of charity would just have to rely on the kindness of strangers. And religion would come back in a big way, especially in the government, where it would be outright mandated. Immigration would come to a complete end, or at the very least be strictly controlled to screen for only those people they deem perfectly compatible with such a society. Women would be subjugated once again, and all of that sounds wonderful to any naive religious extremists and or nationalists who might be listening right now. But what would really happen is that we would join the third world. Everything would decline. America would cease to be a superpower. We'd cease to be competitive. We'd decline in education and technology. We'd decline as an economic and cultural influence as we retract from the world, justified by an America First sort of selfish idealism that would ironically isolate us and then weaken us, leaving us vulnerable to the next superpower that fills the vacuum we leave behind. We're already seeing this happen as our trade partners turn to other countries because they can no longer trust us or rely on us. We're already seeing this happen in the delays of major projects waiting until the end of Trump's term to break ground because of economic uncertainty and the unpredictability of this administration's policies. We're already seeing this happen as we end our aid programs around the world, and China comes in and picks up where we left off because they understand the value of global influence. And in trying to make America great again, we would essentially destroy America. That's how stupid religious extremists are. Their blueprint is all over the place. Anybody can pick it up and see what happens. Other people have died and paid the ultimate price for this lesson over and over again, yet they just want to ignore that history of blood and tears and just do it again anyway. Why? Because this time will be different? What they think about the communists is actually what they should be thinking about themselves. It's not going to be different this time. They're doing it in the exact same way everyone else tried it. The lessons they ignore were bought with people's lives, and that is wildly frustrating, isn't it? Are we going to have to pay the price yet again, only for some future generation to ignore our cautionary tale and start the cycle all over again? Religious authoritarianism is societal cancer. If you catch it early, you can put a stop to it and save your country. If you ignore it and let it metastasize, it will become too late to stop it, and it will destroy your country, as we have seen time and time again all around the world. That's why, if you are a foreign country looking to undermine American dominance, you are sending your money to the religious right, to the so-called patriots. And that, Alanis Morissette, is what you call ironic.
We need to wake up. It's time to wake up, understand the threat, and act accordingly. We must, by the grace of God, attain political power and crush the enemies of Christ. This is the loving thing to do. This is how we love our neighbors.
Why are they against feminism or LGBT people or diversity, etc.? Well, there's a couple of different ways they engage with why they're against them. The ones who are the most honest and open just admit that they hate those people. They hate gay people. They hate black people. They hate women. And they will openly admit it. I don't think there's much I can say to people like that. Their issues are much deeper and much more psychological than I'm equipped to deal with. Perhaps they just need to get to know the people they hate so that they can learn that they're not monsters. Then you have those who are bound by Scripture. That's one of the reasons I do what I do and try to convince people that their religion is false. That's why I talk about the Bible so much. That's why I deconstruct it, argue against it, mock it with animations, etc. Sometimes they base their hatred on a post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. In other words, they mistakenly believe that an event caused an unrelated event simply because one preceded the other. We know this roof collapsed and then a cat crawled on top of it. But since the cat is there and the roof is collapsed, they would think that the cat's weight is what caused the collapse. They think that we're in decline because of gay people or because of feminism, because in the past, when they think things were better, post hoc, those people were properly repressed, but now they're not, ergo, a decline, propter hoc. They see the LGBT people and feminism as this cat causing the roof to collapse. One of the more primitive versions of this fallacy is when religious extremists blame hurricanes on gay people. That's literal caveman mentality. Not only do we know precisely how hurricanes form, but from a logical standpoint, it makes no sense as a form of punishment, especially when most of the victims of said hurricane are not gay or even oppose gay marriage. As hurricanes usually hit where? Where do the hurricanes usually hit? That's right, they usually hit the southeastern United States, that most troublesome spot where Christianity is the most concentrated in the United States. So if God really is causing hurricanes, it would be more logical to think that he's punishing Christians than punishing gay people. Not that either scenario would be logical at all, but one would still be more so than the other. What I find funny about this is that a lot of religious people cite biblical prophecy as a reason they believe in it. But scientists who warned about climate change decades ago predicted with a great degree of accuracy that hurricanes would become more frequent and more powerful. And that's exactly what we're seeing with a dramatic increase throughout the 21st century. And despite the accuracy of their prediction, religious fundamentalists and right-wing grifters still claim climate change is some leftist conspiracy, as if that's where the big money is, rather than in the oil industry. Instead, they point at things like natural disaster deaths declining, which is a direct result of higher building standards due to regulation, which they're also against. They'd literally make everything worse and then blame everyone but themselves. Another example of their use of the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy is when they blame feminism on economic woes caused by crony capitalism. So intellectually, they base their solutions on getting rid of feminism rather than addressing the actual cause. So naturally, the problem will persist, even if they implement their solution. I say they intellectually base their solutions on the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, but emotionally, it's just rooted in really basic bigotry, because that's from where their true motive usually comes. The intellectual arguments are there to justify the primitive emotional desire to indulge in their bigotries, like a little boy trying to convince his mother that candy is actually good for him. The little boy doesn't even believe in his own arguments, so the truth doesn't matter to him. He just wants the candy. And the little boy doesn't realize that his mother can see right through him, just like these Christian nationalists, or the far right in general, don't realize that we can see right through them. It's their lack of self-awareness coming into play again. They don't realize how dumb they look, trying to rationalize their indulgences, rather than just honestly admitting what they are, not only to us, but even sometimes to themselves. Another suspicion of mine is that some of these people use the Bible, specifically their interpretation of the Bible, as an excuse for this patriarchal lifestyle where they get to be in control through no actual merit of their own, but just because ancient book says so. Because they have no real merit, so they have no choice but to appeal to Scripture. While that does cover many of them, it's not universally true. There always are at least some well-meaning people who get swept up in bad ideas. For them, the motive isn't really bigotry, but bigotry is nonetheless a result of their so-called solutions, and in those cases, in my opinion, intention doesn't really matter because they're still hurting people. It's still important to distinguish them from the others, however, because you can actually change their minds. You can tell who they are by how much they enjoy what they're doing. If they seem to see the bigotry as an unfortunate but necessary consequence of the solution, then they're likely just misled and you can win them over. On the other hand, do they revel in and enjoy the bigotry? Do they pridefully use bigoted slurs? Do they take pleasure in the cruelty they either inflict on others or want to inflict on others? If yes, then their arguments will be in bad faith. For them, it doesn't matter what's true, so don't waste your time on them. They just want the candy. The outcome they want is not born of factual evidence or sound argumentation, but rather of primal emotional desire. When a human being punishes someone, for instance, the pleasure centers of their brain light up. And some people probably become addicted to that. And to justify that addiction, they will seek faults in others to punish, even when such faults do not exist. They will ignore proven methods of prevention or rehabilitation because they're addicted to being punitive. Trying to use logic to intelligently persuade such emotionally motivated people with their own identity firmly wrapped up in what they're doing would be as effective as trying to use persuasive rhetoric to convince bees not to collect pollen. It's just what they do. Only when they're not deriving pleasure and when their identity isn't wrapped up in it can they finally be convinced. There are currently places you can go where women are subjugated, where LGBT people and atheists are forced into hiding or face prison or death, where immigration is strictly controlled, where religion is inseparably entwined with the government, where there are no liberal institutions or social welfare, and those places are third world countries. And to the degree that they're developing countries, how well they do always ends up correlating with how much they're dumping their religious authoritarianism. Let me say that again. The more religious authoritarianism they dump, the more their nation improves. In other words, the Christian nationalists could not be more wrong. It's not that those scapegoats are destroying your society. It's that the freedoms we have that allow those people to openly live their lives without fear, which is a major driving factor in the success of a nation. That's why those people become visible after a nation gains its freedom. Notice that I'm not merely stating the inverse of the Christian nationalists' post hoc ergo propter hoc rationalization. I'm not stating that LGBT people, women, and religious minorities like atheists are what make a nation great, in the reverse of the way a Christian nationalist would say that they're destroying a nation. I'm saying that their open presence is a sign of what makes a nation great: freedom. But I am also saying that while LGBT people, women, and religious minorities are not the sole reason for a nation's greatness, they do greatly contribute to a nation's greatness because they're more free to contribute when they're not being oppressed. The Christian nationalists would handicap their own country by suppressing entire populations that include brilliant people like an Erwin Schrödinger or an Alan Turing or a Rachel Carson, simply because they're part of minority groups. Or they would shut out brilliant immigrants who would then go up to our competitors and help make them great. It's like we're in the middle of a marathon, and the Christian nationalists are trying to sell us the idea that breaking our own legs would give us an advantage in the race. And not only can you figure out why that's absurd with a modicum of thought, but it's very easy to verify that it's absurd because plenty of other contestants in the marathon tried it already, and they're all lying in a ditch in agony. No, thank you. Your ideas are bad and wrong. They've already been tried, and they've already failed. The only reason they haven't totally turned the United States into an oppressive religious authoritarian hellhole already, even though it's on its way, is that they are continuously resisted to various degrees of effectiveness. So we really need to keep resisting them to the point where they are finally totally powerless. We really need to keep resisting them to the point where they are finally totally powerless.